Plato's epistemology and metaphysics. Although epistemology is a separate branch of philosophy, one that deals with the theory or study of knowledge, in the case of Plato and many other philosophers, the epistemology, the theory of knowledge, is often mixed in with the metaphysics and inseparable. And so we'll be looking and focusing primarily at his metaphysics, but his epistemology is unavoidable. So, a little background for our good dead friend Socrates. Was born in 470 BC, died in 399 BC, and is of course still dead today. His father was a sculptor, his mother a midwife, and he was known, like many philosophers to this day, to be rather eccentric in appearance and manner. His clothes were rumpled, also a tradition maintained by many philosophers today. He apparently walked like a pelican, which many philosophers don't do, and supposedly he was rather ugly but quite robust. He served in the military and also engaged in some public service. Now, one of the things that Socrates is well known for is his whole wisdom thing. He's kind of the wisdom guy. And here's the story of Socrates and wisdom, and also kind of the backstory to his death. So, a friend of Socrates went to the oracle at Delphi and asked the oracle, who is the wisest of men? Now, the oracle at Delphi was a woman, or rather, there are multiple women there apparently, and what a person would do if they had questions, because they didn't have Google back then, or Facebook or Twitter, if you had a question, a very important question, you'd go to the oracle, and according to the myth, they would commune with the gods and give you an answer. And they were pretty good at it apparently, because the oracle of Delphi endured for an incredibly long time. And you can still go to Delphi today and see where the oracle was. The oracle no longer in business as far as I know, but quite an interesting thing. And so anyways, his friend goes to the oracle and says, "Oh, oracle, who is the wisest of men?" And the oracle says, Socrates. Socrates is the wisest. And so his friend comes running back to Socrates and says, "Hey, Socrates, guess who's the wisest?" And Socrates says, I don't know. And his friend says, "You, Socrates, you're the wisest. The gods have pointed to you as the wisest of men." So Socrates, being Socrates, sets out to prove the gods wrong. And the way he does this is, the most obvious way possible, to trying to find someone wiser. To use an analogy, if the gods spoke to an oracle and the oracle said that someone is the fastest person alive in terms of running, the way to test that would be to just keep challenging fast people to races and to see if someone is faster. And that's what Socrates does. Doesn't challenge people to races, although he does use a running analogy in the Apology. So he goes and challenges people and speaks to politicians, poets, and craftspeople and asks them questions. And as you might gather, he found them all lacking. The politicians and poets all seemed to think they knew far more than they did, and the craftspeople, although they knew things, always thought they knew more than they actually knew. Now, because of this, and various other reasons, he was eventually brought to trial for corrupting the youth and various other kind of odd charges. He, of course, spoilers, was found guilty, sentenced to death, and then eventually, after another dialogue, drank the hemlock and died, and is still dead today. Now, people who study Socrates and Plato do wonder about what were Socrates' actual views, because what we have of Socrates is from our good dead friend Plato, writing about Socrates. Now, Socrates himself held that philosophy was a matter for conversation, typically with lots of wine, and not something for books. So as far as we know, he left behind no writings. Now, people who study Plato and Socrates as their primary focus often claim that the early Platonic dialogues are accurate transcriptions of conversations, and the later dialogues are more Plato speaking through Socrates. Now, one thing that's a bit confusing about early and later here is that some of the early Platonic dialogues written, in terms of the order in which they were written, are actually set later and even at the end of the life of Socrates. For example, the Apology is a fairly early dialogue, written early, relative to the others, but is the dialogue that occurs right before the Crito, in which, spoilers, Socrates dies. And so, to use a Star Wars analogy, there of course were episodes 4, 5, and 6, which came out, before, in terms of when the movies came out in our time, came out well before the episodes 1, 2, and 3, and also the prequels. So kind of a same kind of thing that, is being done here. Plato is writing dialogue set late in Socrates' life first, and then writes later dialogues that are set earlier in Socrates' life. Yeah, kind of confusing, but, there we go. So the truth, though, is not entirely known about what is genuine Socrates and what is Plato, although people have some pretty good ideas. Now, Socrates had as one of his main enemies the sophists, and the sophists were sort of competing, thinkers, and what they would do is they would offer people for return for payment to teach them how to succeed. And what mattered to the sophist was success. And they believed that truth is relative, that morality is relative, and again, what matters is succeeding. And the sophists are alive and well today. Not the original ones, they're super dead, but we always get new sophists. You can turn on most shows involving pundits to see them. So Socrates apparently studied under the sophist Prodicus, but he jokingly said he could only afford the cheap, incomplete course. Now, he criticized the sophists because they did not seek knowledge, but they also, as I noted before, they told people they could teach them how to succeed. And so a fair question would be is if the sophists, kind of the contrast or tension here is obvious. If the sophists claim that everything is relative, the ethics is relative and there is no objective truth when it comes to values, how can they say that all that matters is success? Because that would, if someone says, no, it doesn't, they would have no way of arguing against them objectively. He also believed the sophists were giving people images and illusions, essentially deceiving them. And he regarded the sophists as being a threat to the morality of society. So they were here his kind of main bad guys. Also the poets, for other reasons. If you happen to take the class on aesthetics, or have looked at Plato's Republic, Book 10, or the Ion, another dialogue, he really headed in for the Greek poets. Now for Socrates, the reason why one of the many reasons he's really, sort of against the sophists and the poets, is because of his view of ignorance. For Socrates, the greatest danger stemmed from ignorance. And the worst ignorance is not knowing that one does not know, and regarded his job as curing this ignorance. Now there's a phenomena today in which people, I think it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, in which people, incredibly overestimate their competence in a particular, area or ability. Like the ability to play a game, the ability to do logic, the ability to make decisions, assess claims about, say, to use a serious current example, like COVID-19. And what people have found in this research is that the less people know, the worse they are at something, generally the better they think they are at it, and they're less likely to realize they're bad at it. And this actually is something that Socrates, in talking about ignorance, and also in his dialogue, the Ion, going after the poets, is something he brought up. That someone who knows something will be able to tell the good from the bad, and someone who doesn't won't be able to tell this. And so this is very practical consequences. So if you ever wondered, why do people who seem to know absolutely nothing about something seem to think they know everything, and seem to be unable to recognize when they're wrong? And that is the answer. I mean, it goes back to our good dead friend Socrates. It's that if someone is ignorant, they don't even know that they don't know. And kind of dangerously, they often think they do know, and they can't tell they don't. And you get kind of this, what may seem like a weird effect, like Socrates said, the more that you know, the more you realize that you don't know. Which is why experts often seem to be, lacking in confidence and very cautious. And some people see that as experts being kind of wishy-washy and not knowing things. But the reason why experts do that is because they know in large part, how much they don't know. And if someone's super confident, that often means that they don't know. Not always, of course. And so Socrates' view of ignorance is one quite relevant today. We now turn to a little background for our good dead friend, Plato. So, in a way, if you think of Plato as being kind of like Batman, Socrates is kind of like, the parents of Batman. Martha, Wayne, and Batman's dad. And so Socrates is killed by the state, and Plato becomes, actually he's got a cave too, not a bat cave, but a Plato cave. And he seeks to address this injustice, not through cruising around in a cool car throwing batarangs or Plato-rangs at people, but of course by doing philosophy. And so sort of Plato's driving question was this: why society could not tolerate the existence of Socrates, and what sort of society would be needed to permit wisdom to prevail? Or put another way, how can you build a society that doesn't murder good people? Which is an important question, and one we're clearly still struggling with today. Plato was born around 428, 427 BC, and born into an aristocratic upper-class family. He was trained to be a political leader, and he traveled quite a bit, probably to Egypt perhaps, also went to Syracuse, Italy, around 388, and one of his claims to fame, in addition to writing lots of philosophy, is he founded the famous Academy. And you may wonder, why is it called the Academy? And the answer is this: it was built in a grove, bunch of trees, sacred to the hero Academus, hence Academy, and hence academics. So if the hero had been named like Bob or Finn or something, it would be studying Bobademics or Finademics. So that's where that came from. Now, like some other philosophers, he did attempt to apply his philosophy practically. In 368, and then later in 361 BC, he attempted to train the ruler of Syracuse, a person named Dionysius the Younger, in the ways of philosophical government. He failed, and barely escaped with his life apparently in 361. Other philosophers, such as Confucius, have tried similar things, and generally have failed, which may be good. He died around 348 or 347 BC, and is of course still dead today. Now, in addition to creating the Academy and giving us the word academics, he also created a highly comprehensive philosophy. He was very concerned with ethical theory, again because Socrates, whom he regarded as a good and ethical person, showed him the importance of political philosophy, because again, kind of his goal was, how do you create a society that doesn't murder good people? And he believed that the answers to ethical and political problems were to be found in metaphysics. And so he believed that philosophy was, very connected. You had to, deal with, say, metaphysics first, then you could address ethics and political philosophy. And of course, in order to make any progress in philosophy at all, be it ethics, political philosophy, or metaphysics, you need a theory of knowledge and epistemology. And so he creates this massive comprehensive philosophy and wrote a lot of stuff, a lot of dialogues. And so that's the background for our good dead friends, Socrates and Plato. So stay safe, and I'll see you in